But yeah, we are going to be talking today about basic prototyping and design accessibility. This is a pretty big lecture. I think it's one of the most exciting ones because you get to start putting interactions into your designs, which is really important and gives it a whole new kind of dimensionality. So yeah, for anybody attending at home, today we'll be still sharing the attendance. Everything is still going to function the same way. And today I can also see the Twitch chat. I have like a separate monitor, so I actually can see everything going on. And we also are going to have Tiffany, Kaden, and Nseke on the stream to answer any questions. So please feel free to ask any questions. And then today specifically, I'll try to answer questions that come up in Twitch chat. So if you have anything you're curious about, please just go ahead and send it and I'll answer it the soonest opportunity we can. Yeah, thanks for bearing with us, and we'll go ahead and start. So today we're going to be going over actually first the midterm project. So the midterm project is going to be over the next 2 weeks. You're going to not have any homework. You're going to have plenty of time to work on the midterm, and we'll be introducing what the prompt is, and then all of the details are going to come out later tonight so that you have all the information you need to get started. We're also going to talk again about prototyping. We're not going to do the entire full massive deep dive into everything that's possible with prototyping because there is a lot of it. There will be another lecture in just a couple weeks that goes into the nitty-gritty of it. But today we're going to talk about basic prototyping, how to do it, what the functions are. And then for today's theory portion, we're going to discuss design accessibility. The attendance form to today is yelkey.com/class. It expires around 8:30, so it's only going to be applicable for the duration of this stream, and it's going to have the form for week 5, lecture 5, today's content. Again, that's yelkey.com/class. I can go ahead and type it in the chat as well. Awesome. Yeah, let us know if there's anything that's not working with that, but it should be okay. Again, it's always only for enrolled students, so anybody who is currently enrolled in the class at Berkeley, please fill out the attendance form. You can follow along with it as we go, so it's a little easier to do. But yeah, before we dive right into the content, I wanted to also ask if anybody had any lingering questions about the pen tool. I know it might be kind of hard to verbalize a question, but if you have any thoughts, feel free to message them in the chat. I'll wait for just a minute, and I'm happy to answer anything or do a really quick demo of anything that was confusing about the pen tool. While I wait for that, we'll also be releasing a walkthrough of Lab 4. I apologize if it's not out yet. I didn't get a chance to record it quite yet this weekend, but I'll be recording it soon, hopefully tomorrow, if not a little bit earlier. And I'll be walking through all of the activities in Lab 4. I think that is probably the easiest way to learn the pen tool, is just to do the practice. And then hopefully if you weren't able to go to a live lab, the lecture recording or the lab recording will be helpful in understanding what exactly to do. Okay, seems like no questions are coming in. Again, feel free to message anything in the chat. During the rest of the class today, I'm happy to do a quick demo of the pen tool at the end if that's something that we need. Okay, cool. So the midterm. The midterm prompt is to create a project about a local restaurant. It's very open-ended. We do have a couple of general detailed prompts that we can give you, but the gist of it is that we really want you to take all of the tools that we've learned so far, besides today's prototyping skills, and combine them. So thus far, all of the projects that we've been doing, all of the homeworks and all the labs have been pretty isolated. All of them are going to focus on just one main skill. So we've talked about the selection tool, we've talked about the pen tool, talked about components, variants, shapes, text, but we haven't really had a situation where you've put them all together beyond a pretty surface level. We've also talked about the theory of design and specifically about user research and user testing. So with this midterm project, we want to give you this 2-week period to really explore what it's like to put all of those skills together for the first time. So we want you to see this project through from start to finish. So all the way from identifying a problem that you want to solve, thinking about what you care about, going through the entire design process of doing research, doing prototypes, actually seeing what that low, mid, and hi-fi might look like for your project, putting on that last layer of polish, and sending it out to, finish it, have it be complete. And we are going to introduce the 4 prompts, and then there's also an option for you to create your own prompt if that's something that you're interested in doing. So why are we actually talking about local restaurants specifically? It's for three main reasons. The first is this idea of personal familiarity. We want you to select a business that you and people that you know have been to. So something like a burger joint in your hometown that you really went to all the time after school or you have fond memories of. It could be something that's in Berkeley if it's a place that you really like. Like I might pick maybe Sweetheart Cafe, just a place that always brought me a lot of joy. There's a sense of a personal connection there that you can start thinking about what design would look like for yourself and for the community that is around you. Another good part of this is that you can conduct actual user research by analyzing both your personal experiences and those of your friends or family. So we talked about user research before, and we really want to see you do that. It's not necessarily like strictly enforced because we know that it can be difficult to get contacts from people while we're not necessarily in person, but we do really hope to see user research in your project. It's something that we're basically requiring. It's not necessarily a super hard requirement, but because we're talking about these local restaurants, we would love to see you talk to, say, your family members, your friends, people that you've been to these restaurants with. There's also a sense of tangibility that comes with this idea of a restaurant. A lot of design work, especially for personal projects, is largely hypothetical. There's a lot of things like, oh, I wish there was an app for Berkeley students to get to know each other better, but it's hard to actually put that in place. So the design project that you might do around that is pretty hypothetical. But when we talk about something like a local restaurant that physically exists, there is an actual storefront, there is an actual footprint for the store, you can more easily visualize the real world problems and possible solutions that go with them. So when you think about a local restaurant, you can think about, oh, hey, when I went there, the wait time was really long because they were understaffed. Or, hey, when I went there, I really liked the way that they had unique serving dishes. There's things that you can physically pinpoint that make it a little bit easier to do this sense of digital design. And thirdly, this idea of community is really at the core of what design is. Restaurants inherently are a space that creates culture by providing a meeting ground. They provide a place to share a meal, which is a really intimate thing to do with your family, your friends, anybody that you know. They are basically a space of community by design. So as you work on this project, we want you to consider both the physical location, the staff, the food, all of that, but also the people that it encompasses, the kind of experiences that it encompasses. You're going to have a really different project if you think about, like I mentioned earlier, a burger joint that's existed in your hometown for 70 years. It's been run by the same family for generations. That's going to be different from, say, a really hip new place that recently opened that has like fusion food from a lot of different cultures because it's run by a series of maybe friends who are from different cultures and different backgrounds that want to tie their food together. Those are going to create really different spaces. And the reality is that different people are going to gravitate to different restaurants. So think about the community that surrounds the specific restaurant that you pick. What's unique about it? What do you love about it? Why does it feel good to go there? Why does it feel comfortable to go there or not comfortable to go there? Think about that. Think about both the tangibility and the kind of more abstract ideas that surround that restaurant. So going into the prompts, there are two primary routes that we're going to be able to go down: visual design and UI UX. So the visual design the visual design route has two prompts. First is branding and second is illustration. For branding, we want you to do a redesign because the restaurant will have some kind of existing branding. And apologies, it says one, it should say two. It's going to be two marketing assets of any kind. I'll edit that after lecture. It says it should be correct in the actual midterm document we have later. Basically, what we want you to do is examine the existing branding, think about how it currently exists, redesign that branding system, think about what we did in week 2 with the colors and the type, and think about the identity that they've created with the elements of their branding. Then we want you to create 2 assets of some kind. It could be a menu, it could be a poster, it could be a sign, it could be basically anything. We just want 2 assets that follow that branding scheme. And then we want you also to make sure, in this case, that you use the pen tool and vector networks. In both of the visual design prompts, you will have to use the pen tool, but you will not have to use components. So if you found last week's homework really exciting, but you struggled a lot with variants, you might gravitate a little bit more towards visual design. If the opposite was true, if you really dislike illustration, if you do not like making icons, but you really liked components and you like the idea of making interfaces, then you might pick the UI UX prompts, which we'll talk about in a second. So going back to this, illustration is going to be creating 3 illustrations inspired by the restaurant. These don't necessarily need to follow their exact branding guidelines. They don't have to be something that they would like put on their menu, but we want them to be inspired by the visual identity. So it could be something like, I really love the pho that this restaurant serves. I want to make a set of illustrations of people eating the pho, or like my family members eating the pho. It could be something like you really do like their colors and you want to make 3 illustrations that are inspired by the colors and the smells and the taste that you feel when you're in that restaurant. Any 3 illustrations that are somehow inspired by and tied to that restaurant are a-okay for this particular prompt. The minimum dimensions are pretty flexible. We want it to be a minimum of the A4 frame size. But because it's a vector illustration, technically it's resizable. But this is just to give us a little bit of a sense of the scope of the project. And again, for here, you must use pen tools and vector networks. To clarify, if you do want to use components for either of these, because there are situations where it might be helpful, please feel free to. It's just not required. And the second route is the UI UX route. And also, just as a heads up, if you have any questions about anything I'm saying right now, please message the chat. I'll address it immediately. But the UI UX prompts, there are 2 as well. One is web and one is mobile. For the website, we've realized that a lot of restaurants do have an existing website. So the website one is a redesign. Find a restaurant that has a website. That's going to be a prerequisite for this particular prompt. It must already have a website. And then we want you to create 3 to 4 screens of low, mid, and hi-fi wireframes. And they should be desktop web dimensions. You will have to use components and variants, but you will not have to do prototyping. This is a great opportunity to practice prototyping if you want to, but since we're teaching it today, we're not requiring it. Now, the other option is to do mobile, where this is a little bit more specific. If you choose to do the mobile route, we would like you to specifically design a delivery app for that restaurant. So the reason for this is that most restaurants don't necessarily have their own apps already, and we want it to stand out a little bit and be tailored to that restaurant as opposed to just being like a DoorDash copy or an Uber Eats copy. We want you to be able to use DoorDash and Uber Eats as inspirations, but we don't want you to necessarily do a redesign that's just reskinning those things with the right branding. So in this case of a delivery app, it's a similar scope as the web project, where you create 3 to 4 screens showing low, mid, and hi-fi. It should be in phone screen dimensions, and again, use components and variants. So that was the 4 given prompts: branding, illustration, web, and mobile. But the final option is to submit your own prompt. You could do basically anything you want. Like, for example, one of the previous submissions for a prompt was creating a queuing app. So like a way to line up or be on the wait list for a particular restaurant that often had a long line whenever they went. So I think the reason why that student selected to do a queuing app as opposed to doing a delivery app was because it was ramen. It was a place where having delivery for like a soupy food didn't make sense. So they identified a problem with their prompt and decided to go for something different. That is a great option. It is a great way to do an open-ended prompt. But basically, if you do want to make your own project, we want you to run with it. We want you to do it. But we will ask that you submit a proposal so that we can read over it and make sure it's within the same scope, or basically the same general amount of time it would take to do the other projects, just to be fair. You know, we don't want you to do a version of these projects that's just like, oh, it's like 1/4 of the time spent. We want to make sure that it's fair. So by Friday, 11:59 p.m., this coming Friday, in 3 days, you would have to submit a proposal. Can be short, 250 words. There's more details about what to include on our documentation later. And it must be submitted by then. So we'll review it over the weekend and let you know any changes that you might need to make to your proposal. There might be a situation where we'd have to reject your proposal if it does not follow the guidelines that we've outlined, in which case you would have to do one of the 4 prompts just so that you have enough time. But for the most part, we're here to help, and we really want you to be able to do what you want. In your proposal, you must specifically identify a set of requirements similar to how we outline them in our document, and also whether you're going to use the pen tool or components. One of them is required. Now that in mind, let's talk about how to submit this midterm. It is due Monday the 18th by 11:59 p.m. So it'll be due by the end of the night, not by 6 p.m., but it is due Monday. So please keep in mind it's due Monday, the day before lecture 7, 2 weeks from now, and not at 6 p.m. the day of lecture. So just keep that in mind. And just like homework, it'll be available for up to 70% credit up until that Friday. The submission should be a single PDF that includes the link to the Figma file. This is because we realized that B Courses doesn't let you submit 2 things, so we just want to make sure that the Figma file is inside the PDF write-up. So this file that you submit should encompass the entire process. So if you start from brainstorming, any kind of sketches you do on paper, we would love to see that. Any kind of user research that you do, if you make like a Google Doc or a Google form, we want to see that as well. But the final product should be clearly labeled on like a page of its own, or just really clearly expressed that like, hey, this is the final. It should be easy for us to identify. But basically, we want to see everything, but we want to make sure we know what your final project is. So again, include that link as part of the write-up, which is going to be a 300-ish word PDF describing the restaurant, why you selected it, so why you care about it, what your design process looked like. So for example, I started by sketching on paper a bunch of ideas that I had, and then I asked my friends about why they liked the restaurant, and then I started doing all of my low fidelity prototypes. And then an overview of your final design. So talk us through some of the decisions you made. Like, for example, I originally was going to use these colors, but I decided to change them because the colors felt associated with another similar restaurant. Or I decided to initially start with the web redesign, but I realized I didn't have a website, so I decided to change to the illustration prompt. Anything like that, just to give us more insight, since it's the only text that's going to be associated with your project. In terms of submission, we also wanted to talk about slip days and DSP accommodations. You receive 1 free slip day, which is 24 additional hours to submit either the midterm or the final project without penalty. We'll automatically apply the slip day to wherever it best impacts your grades. So for basically meaning that the final is weighted more than the midterm. So if you submit each of them 2 days late, we'll apply it where it is more helpful by the end of the semester. That said, if you find this week that you need an extension on the project for any kind of personal reason, please let us know, ideally by the Wednesday before the project deadline, meaning this coming Wednesday, so a week from tomorrow. We want to make sure that you have time, and we know that things happen, your life comes first. Just let us know and we'll be sure to accommodate for it. We don't want anybody to lose a crap ton of sleep over anything that we do for this class. We just want to make sure that you're learning. So yeah, just let us know if you need an extension. We are happy to help. Please don't be scared of us. And also, if you have any DSP accommodations or a DSP letter, please contact us via email. You don't have to get a specific DSP letter for this course. Anything that you got for another course is more than fine. Let us know any accommodations that you have. Since we're not an exam-based class, we'll try to apply them in a way that's similar. Just make sure that you have enough time and enough accommodation for the projects and any of the assignments in this course. We apologize for not bringing this up earlier in the course. We realize that it's in the syllabus, but we never explicitly said it out loud. But yeah, please let us know. Cool. Any questions about the midterm? I know that was a lot of content. It's all going to be up on our course website and on the B courses linked to the course website. Right after lecture, we wanted to just wait until we talked through all of this. But any questions? I'll wait for a minute. Okay, we're going to go ahead and move on, but if you have any questions later, feel free to message. I also wanted to call out one thing. It's said pretty explicitly on the document itself, but please do not call the website to do user research. In an actual situation, if you were designing for the website or for the restaurant, that's the first thing you should do. but we did not contact every single restaurant in Berkeley and every hometown restaurant to say like, hey, a bunch of students are going to call you. So unfortunately, while that would be a great thing to do in the design process, please do not call them or bother them. They are busy. They are probably understaffed. So don't cause any distractions for the restaurants. Be mindful of the space that you're taking up there. And just talk to people who've been there. Talk to people, if you have any friends that maybe work there, talk to them. But yeah, just don't call them during work hours. Please don't do that. Awesome. And on that note, we're going to go ahead and talk about basic prototyping. What exactly is prototyping? We've said it quite a few times today. We said it before in the past when we talked about wireframing versus prototyping. And today you're going to find out. So prototyping is the process of turning design concepts into tangible forms. So these forms, whether they're digital or physical, can be tested to reveal insights. So within the context of Figma and other tools that do prototyping, this term prototyping basically means adding interactions to the designs that you have. So in this example, you can see this mini game and a bunch of noodles, like all these blue arrows that go everywhere, have all these blue dots that explain like, hey, when you touch this button, you're going to go to this screen. And when you touch this button, you're going to go to this screen. And when you touch any of these buttons, they're all going to go up here. So having all of these interactions on your designs allows you to mimic what it's going to react like when you actually use it, what it's going to do, what it's going to change. So prototyping allows you to demonstrate how interfaces behave and account for how users will interact with those interfaces. So recall earlier when we talked about fidelity. So low fidelity is that general idea of a concept, a layout. Sometimes you might want to prototype these for really base interactions. Like if you wanted to do this Instagram lo-fi prototype, you might just do a really quick like, hey, if you click on this post, it'll open a post page. Mid fidelity, in this case, when you're at that stage, prototyping might be used to observe user interaction with and test organization of interface. So if you were to prototype a mid-fidelity version of Instagram, you'd say like, well, hey, there's text here now, there's filler text explaining what's going to be happening. It'll be a little bit more helpful to test different things like the layout and things like that. When you're at high fidelity, when the design is pretty polished, you can do prototyping to kind of elevate your design to show when you're working like, hey, this is exactly what's going to happen. This is the exact animation I want, and I want it to take 150 milliseconds. You can be that specific so that when you hand it off to, say, a developer and when you start coding it, they're going to know exactly how it's going to react. Not just what it's going to look like, but how it's going to react to things. It's really surprising, I think, sometimes how small interactions have so much going on behind them. Like, for example, if I just open this, a lot of stuff just happened. When I hover over this, the whole tab itself lights up. Another button appears. If I were to click on that, it would close. But when I click on it, it has to load in this whole screen. And then there's a decision you have to make there of like, oh, when you load the screen, is it going to be instant? Is it going to have some kind of fading in effect? All of this stuff is things that you have to consider anytime that you do even a basic action. So prototyping is essentially forming connections between two objects within a frame of some kind. It allows designers to define what happens when user A interacts with A and how A gets to B. Think of frames in a prototype almost as like different instances. Like they're kind of, all an instance of your phone screen. All of the prototypes or all of the frames that you create are going to exist on one device for the most part. So you can think of each one as, one thing that somebody's going to see. So for example, this is a screenshot or set of screenshots of Fee's cat Lychee. Each interaction with the page results in a different instance or a different frame, from the main page to clicking on a post to clicking on the comment button. So in this case, I have the Instagram open. I click on this post, so I specifically click within this square. It's going to go ahead and open up this page, this particular instance. And when that happens, the whole window is going to pop up from the side. It's going to appear in a certain way. And then once I have this open, I can click on the comment button. And when I do that, it's going to bring me here to this comment screen. And when I do that, you're going to recall that your keyboard pops up. So again, there's that additional layer of interaction that's happening there. All I did was click twice and a whole lot of stuff has just happened. There can also be multiple connections made from one object or frame, and as long as the interactions all have different triggers, which we'll talk about in a second, they'll all be applicable. So there's different situations where, for example, hovering on this tab and clicking on it do two different things. So the reality is that not everything is going to be as clean as this, where you just click and you just click and you just click, and that's all that happens. Actual apps are pretty complicated. There's a lot going on. So we want to make sure that we can accommodate for all of those by having multiple interactions. So in the same vein, we look again at this Instagram post, and from this particular banner button, this bookmark icon, there are two interactions. If you just tap on it, it's going to go ahead and say save to collection, or it's going to go pop up a thing that says it was saved. But if you tap and hold it, you can actually create a new collection immediately. Oh, you follow this page. Awesome. Yeah, this is Fee's cat, one of the instructor's cats. But yeah, so this is an example, again, just like this kind of hover click option, where there's multiple interactions that happen on the same thing. So in order to access any of this, you might have realized that you probably haven't seen any of that blue noodle soup that we saw earlier, because in order to prototype, you have to enter prototyping mode through Figma. So on this right sidebar, we can go ahead and just open it here. There's a panel that says design and also a panel that says prototype. There's also an inspect panel, which is just going to give you code for stuff. But basically, we're introducing this prototype mode. In order to add any kind of interactions, you have to enter prototype mode, which allows you to, add all of those connections. While you're in this mode, you'll still have a limited access to tools. I wouldn't recommend doing your design work while you're in prototype mode, because when you have a lot of stuff going on, doing things like, adding a square is kind of uncomfortable because all this stuff pops up and these are all selectable. So just keep in mind which tab you're on. Okay, yeah, so to view the results of anything that you do prototype, you click on the triangle or the present button. And this is a little bit of a spoiler. All of the lecture slides right now, we're showing them like this because we're treating them like a prototype. Figma's default state, if you do not have anything prototyped, like for example, you see here, we click prototype, there's no soup, there's nothing going on here. Because Figma by default will present things right to left, top to bottom, like reading. So what I'm actually just doing is using the arrow keys to click between these slides right now. In order, and Figma knows the order that we want to go in because we've laid them out that way. But this is what it's going to look like when you're in the prototype view. We're going to do a demo that walks through what it looks like later as well. Device settings. So whenever you're designing, you're probably designing for, a phone, a desktop, a screen of some kind. That's why Figma allows to have these device settings that say, hey, you can look at your prototype on an iPhone 11 Pro, or you can look at it on a MacBook Pro. These device settings help you have a better representation of the prototype because you can see the screen as if you're actually like holding a phone or looking at a phone. Something neat is that there's actually also an app called Figma Mirror that you can download on your phone that will actually open up anything you have on your Figma computer app on your phone, so you can actually look at your prototypes there. We're not going to walk through it too much. I'll send a link to it in the wrap-up message for today, but it's something interesting to check out, especially if you're doing user testing and you're like, hey, I need you to look at this on your phone. I can actually do that. You can open the prototype on your phone. Yeah. So whenever you do this device setting, it's important to remember what you're designing for. So if you're designing for like a phone, or if you're making the slide deck, you probably won't want to view it on a phone. In fact, let's just do that. If I say device, here it's none, which is why it shows me the whole screen. But if I put it on a iPhone 13 Pro Max, even horizontally, it's going to get kind of weird. Here we go. It's loading. Yeah, this is kind of trippy. I don't really want to look at my slides like this. I want to look at them on a device that makes sense. Arguably, I could say, hey, I'm going to look at it on a computer. I guess it doesn't really show it here, but I can look at it on a Surface Pro. And now it's going to reload and show me what the slides would look like if I was using them on a Surface Pro tablet. Or it won't load. Oh, there we go. But yeah, obviously the screen size that I've been using is a little bit too big for the Surface Pro, so I have to keep scrolling around, panning around to see all of it. But, it's helpful. It's helpful to know that, like, the thing that you just designed does not really fit on a Surface Pro. So if somebody wants to watch this lecture on a Surface Pro, okay, Figma just reloaded. It is not happy about me doing this. So the moral of the story is to make sure that you're doing the right thing at the right time, which in this case, I would want to have it set to none or set to presentation. And I'm going to keep talking while this loads and hopefully does not crash. Everything is fine. And I'm going to go ahead and reset this to just say none. Wow, it is unhappy with me. Okay, we're good now. Everything should be fine. Awesome. So building a connection. So how to actually add these prototypes. To add a prototype interaction, you're going to select an object while you're in that prototype mode. And then a little blue plus sign, oh, the image is not loading, should appear on that object. I'm actually going to go ahead and close this out. I think my computer is mad at me right now with the stuff that I have open. So let me just redo this. Yeah, basically what's going to show up when you're in prototype mode is when you select an object, a little plus sign with a circle around it will appear. And from there, you're able to click and drag and go to whatever it is that you want to connect it to. It's pretty intuitive. It feels pretty good to do the prototyping itself. But yeah, this node should appear on an object. Click and drag the node or the hotspot to another object to make a connection. Or you can also use the plus sign in your interactions panel. There are three components. I guess it's kind of a tricky word to use. There are three parts of a prototyping interaction. The first are the triggers. Triggers are the user interaction, so it's what the user themselves is doing to cause a response. So there's something like a click, a drag, a hover, a mouse press, I press the spacebar on my keyboard, something like that. The action is what the interface does in reaction to the trigger when it's activated. So it's something like open a page, open an overlay, scroll here, close this, go back, navigate to the screen. So trigger is what the user does, action is what the interface does, and animation is how the interface does it. So the interface determines how the prototype moves from one frame to another. It could do an instant, it could dissolve. If you think about Google Slides once more, Google Slides has all of those fun little transitions, like the star dissolve, the thing where it flips into a cube and turns into a gallery. Those are not built in, but animation is the same idea. Instant dissolve, move in, push it, slide it, anything like that. And then the most interesting and unique one is Smart Animate. Smart Animate basically fills in the gaps for you and makes things look super smooth. So again, those three parts are triggers, what the user does, actions, what the interface does, and animations, how the interface does it. Once you've made a connection between two frames, a little menu will pop up that lets you edit the interaction details of that particular prototype or of that particular connection. So you can change the trigger here, you can change the action and the animation. The animation often has a couple of extra things like how long it's going to take and what it's going to look like. And it always shows you a little bit of a demo so you can get an idea of what it'll do. And then also the destination. So it's whatever you dragged the original node to, it's where the screen is going to take you. So we have this example here of basically Smart Animate. So whenever you click in this particular example on the pink square, you see that the node is attached to this pink square and not the whole frame because we want to only do this when you click the square. So when you click the square, it's going to bring you to this frame. It's going to navigate you to the frame. And you see that it's doing this nice little fade in and out through Smart Animate. Smart Animate is putting together all of those middle frames of like getting smaller little by little, changing the color little by little, because Figma can kind of smartly figure out what it is that you're going for. Otherwise, you'd have to like make every single frame that's going on here, which is not ideal. In the case of going backwards, we have the hotspot on just the orange square. Again, we don't want it to happen when we click outside of it, and it goes all the way to the frame again. Yeah, any questions about that so far? We are going to do a demo that walks through all of the prototyping, so do not worry. Okay, if you have any questions, feel free to message in the chat. I think we're going to go ahead and push through this before we do the break. I want to get this all done before we pause. So we're going to go through all of the prototyping and then also do the demo, and then we'll take a quick break and then we'll come back and talk about accessibility. So it'll be a little bit further than halfway through. But yeah, let's keep going. So prototyping functions, how do we actually start doing this? Why are we doing it? Oh, something happened on this page. What can you do with prototyping tools? Basically a lot. You can do a lot of things with prototyping. By making simple connections with prototyping mode, we can make functional buttons, we can navigate between frames, we can create basic animations. And this week we're going to cover mostly basic prototyping tools, but in week 8, 3 weeks from now, we'll go into more detail about advanced prototyping functions. But yeah, all of these things you can do really quickly in Figma just with some prototypes, just with a couple of clicks. So one example of the prototyping that you could see being helpful is when you have a mock-up for something like Spotify. So a couple of weeks ago, we made Spotify. If you wanted to see how that might interact, you could add prototyping to it. You could add all the interactions. And actually, you're going to be doing that in lab this week. So here, they've prototyped an interaction between a playlist and the thumbnail in the search results and the main page. It is literally just like one interaction that goes back and forth. But it looks so nice. Like you can immediately see, how is this going to look? How is it going to work? Just because you added probably like less than 10 clicks of stuff. So this set of interactions results in this animation. And here's some examples of prototyping with components. So an interesting feature that came out a while ago, but I believe is still in beta, is called interactive components that makes stuff like this really easy. There's a lot of situations where you have, say, a checkbox where all of them are going to have the same reaction to clicking. So in this button case, anytime you click a button, they're going to be moved to the right, or they're going to be moved to the left. Anytime you swipe any of these emails, like a component like we talked about before, they're going to react the same way. This feature might still be in beta, and I recommend that you check it out. We're not going to be teaching it explicitly because it's in beta, but interactive components basically make stuff a lot easier to prototype. You're going to realize soon that prototyping can get really messy because you're going to have to make copies of the same frame a lot with small changes. So like if I wanted to have, okay, I'll explain it later, but you're going to have to basically make all these copies of all these pages over and over again, which is going to be a little bit messy. But interactive components is going to fix that. It's going to make it a lot easier in the future. But yeah, actions and animations. So while we talked about the triggers, the actions and the animations, some things are not quite as self-explanatory. Triggers are, clicks, hovers, that sort of thing. The name basically tells you what's going on, but the actions are a little more confusing. We'll be exploring both of them more in lab since it's pretty hard to visualize, but really quickly I'll cover some of these examples. So recall again that actions are reactions really to triggers, and they have these types: navigate, open overlay, scroll, swap, back, close, open. So the action of opening an overlay is a little bit hard to visualize, but what it's basically doing is bringing something that is smaller than the whole screen to open on the screen. So for example, my phone, I'm going to try not to show you my messages. When I pull down from the top menu, that's like an overlay. That's like something that is being added to the screen that doesn't take up the whole screen. This kind of menu thing that's coming up here. I don't want it to necessarily take up the whole screen. Even when I have it dragged down all the way, it's just going to be to here. But it's something to keep in mind that sometimes you have overlays that don't need to use everything. So the Workspace Frames Interactions detail panel here show you what an overlay might look like. You can position it at the top, in the middle, in the left, the right, wherever you need it. And you can give it an animation like to be moved in this case, where it feels like it's being swiped down. You're going to realize soon that interactions are going to give you a sense of three-dimensionality. So while you're usually designing in a 2D space, you can give a sense of like a z-index or a height because things live on top of each other. Things are kind of on top, below, the way that layers are, and interactions are going to more easily help you communicate that. Now another action, the most basic one, is navigate to. So what this is going to do is open different screens. So for example, in this case, if I click on this tab, it will navigate to this page. If I click on this tab, it will navigate to this page. It's the most basic idea of just changing the screen that you're looking at. These are also a bunch of the animations, and I do think that Figma does a really good job of using these preview animations to show you what it's going to look like. But I'm not going to walk through all of them, that's a lot, but play around with them in your own time and in the lab in any of the future homeworks. But these all, I think, really well communicate what they look like. The trajectory of the animations can also be edited by customizing the easing curves. So the easing curves are basically telling you more granularly how quickly things happen. So in this case, if I have a ball that I want to move up and down, you can think of like an animation, for example. If I just have it go on a straight line, it's going to go like this. There's not going to be any variation in the speed. But if you actually threw like a ball up in the air, we all learned this in physics in high school. When you throw a ball up in the air, it slows down at the top, and then it kind of hovers for a minute, and then it comes back down quickly. So this easing curve here of slow, fast, slow, slow, fast, slow is going to give you that sense of a natural movement. You're going to see that a lot with like apps. Anytime you swipe something in and out, it's not really just like a direct motion. There's a little bit of added friction, I guess, that gives it a sense of it feeling natural. A lot of things feel good because they're finely tuned to react like they would in real life. Nothing in real life actually moves just like that. Everything in real life has air resistance. It has friction. Stuff feels good because it mimics those things. Yeah, more examples. This is one that gets really slow and then goes really fast. This is one that goes really fast and then gets slower. These are kind of fuzzy to see here, so I'd recommend opening it up on your own computer to watch these GIFs in better quality. But yeah, I mentioned earlier, a lot of connections happen. I keep saying it's noodle soup. You get this kind of prototyping spaghetti because these arrows are trying to get from here to here all really quickly. So prototyping many interactions on the same interface can get pretty complicated. This was an example of a pretty in-progress prototyping. For a demo we were supposed to do in a previous lecture, but didn't get time to do. And although it's not even complete yet, it looks really messy because what's going on is that we have a checklist with 4 items. That's all we need to do. But because of the way Figma works, if I say that when I click on this button, I open a new screen, I navigate to a new screen, I have to make every possible combination of these 4 buttons and have them all map to each other. Interactive Component solves this problem, where I could say that all of these are a component where if you click it, it is filled, and then if you click it again, it's unfilled, meaning I would only have to have like one screen. But because that's not currently out of beta yet, we're just teaching it this way, which means that you have to have every possible combination, and it gets really, really messy. It's just something you have to bear with, and it's a really important thing then to make sure that your layers are named meaningfully. Whenever you saw, like, for example, that idea of a navigate to, I'll show you later, it's going to ask you for what frame to navigate it to, and if everything is named like a key smash, or it's all named like frame 6, frame 7, frame 8, frame 9, it's going to be super hard to figure out where you're going. So you want to have them be meaningful, like, for example, checked trash, checked speedrun, checked decal, to indicate exactly which one it's going to. Yeah, use components, even though you aren't necessarily using interactive components. Whenever you're doing this, good organization within the components that you use is really good practice. So this workspace with these organized layers shows everything really clearly. It's all mapped out. I have different versions here of the same icons that can be really useful to use. Yeah, and something that is new and also saves a lot of headache, this feature came out between us teaching the course last time and this time, is multiple flows. So while you're prototyping in Figma, what you had to use to do was a single page can only have one prototype active, but sometimes you need multiple. So in this case, with prototyping Figma, you can create multiple flows for your prototype in one page to kind of preview different options. So by definition, a flow is a path a user can take down a series of connected frames, even if it branches, even if like there's a ton of interactions you can take. It's always going to start somewhere. Multiple flows have different starting points. It can be useful for a couple different use cases, specifically iterating between different designs, like for A/B testing. If I decided to make all of the stuff on one page, but I need them to have different flows, if I'm doing A/B testing, then I can have them be multiple flows on the same page. So another example is if you have, like, say, the entire app on one page, but you want to test like the event flow or the chat flow or the account flow or the feed flow or the phone notification flow. Having multiple things that you can start from, like if it starts here, 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 or here, is going to be a lot easier just to work with and to use. So how do you actually create these flows? Whenever you create a connection between two frames that they are not already connected to anything else, it's going to create a new starting point, a new flow starting point. You can create multiple flows by using the same frames or adding different starting points. So you can either select the starting frame, click in the part of the sidebar that allows you to add new frames or new starting points, or you can just right-click the starting point, the frame, and then add the starting point. Basically, there's a couple different ways you can do it, and it's always important to make sure that things are starting where you want them to start. Once you've made these different flows, it's important to name them in a way that is appropriate. So in this case, I have this default name of flow 1, and I want to give it a description and say, this is the account making flow. So in this case, I'd probably want to rename this to say account flow. When you're in presentation mode, you can then toggle between different flows on the same page. I'll go ahead and show that in a minute. When each flow description is also shown, which is useful for providing prompts for usability testing, documentation, or anything else like that. Awesome. Any questions about that so far? I'm about to do a demo that's going to walk through this and hopefully will make a lot more sense. Okay. So if we go to the lecture and we go to the prototyping practice here, we're going to go ahead and do this. So actually, I don't want the starting point. This is actually just going to be a singular flow. I only want it to do certain things here. So cool. What I'm going to do is make a copy of everything. And then I'll remove the interaction so that I can actually show you what it's going to look like. So I'm here, and what I wanted to do is basically some quick navigations. This is the home screen. From the home screen, I want to be able to add this overlay. The sidebar is basically going to pop up and show up here. And then it's also going to have a settings screen, which I can access from the overlay. So the settings are going to allow me to open this screen. And then from this screen, I want to be able to toggle this button on, and then also go back to this home screen. Okay. Yes. Okay. Double checking this to make sure I know what's going on. Yeah. Cool. So from here, I want to add my first interaction. Oh, I see a question. Can you combine flows if you accidentally created multiple? To combine different flows, they just need to touch. They need to have an interaction anywhere. If you create multiple flows, it's less of like tangibly they must be separate and more of there's new places you could start. So if I wanted to, for example, I have a really, really complicated app and it's all one flow, I could add an additional starting point in the middle of it just to be like, hey, I want to be able to really quickly access from here. So it's basically just different places to begin. So if you have a lot of flows going on, you can combine them just by normally adding connections to them, basically. I hope that makes sense. I think it's a little bit difficult to quite understand what's going on, but I'm going to open up the lab file, and I think that will actually be really helpful in understanding. But yeah, so here I am in prototyping mode here. I'm going to click on this and say that when this icon, this hamburger menu icon is clicked, I want to open the overlay. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm clicking on the node and dragging it to anywhere on this frame. It's going to say on click and not navigate to, I want it to open overlay. It's going to go ahead and open that. So you see that it has this kind of target space about where it's going to go. I actually want it to be up here on the left. So I want to be touching the left side. I can also not click manual and just say top left, basically here. It's going to open exactly where I want it. But if I wanted to have it manual, like if for some reason I really wanted this menu to be like here, I can do that. But in this case, it's easier for me to just say open to the left. I want to have this option turned on, close when you click outside, then add a background. So it's going to be a little bit darker. Let's have these not on for now, just so you get a sense of what that is. I want it to move in, not this way, because if it's this way, the menu is going to move from here and this way. I want it to go this way. So from the left, into the screen like it shows here. B is the overlay, A is the screen. Yeah, so let's go from here. Let's say it doesn't close and it doesn't add a background, and we can go ahead and click this. So this is where you're going to see the multiple flows. As you can see up here, this flow still exists. It's called flow 1. But I right now want to be viewing flow 2 without deleting flow 1. So I can see both of them here. So I want to make sure I'm on flow 2. And actually, let's add a device. Oh crap, I don't know what dimensions these are. This is 411 by 891. So I'm going to make one that's pretty close. 411 by 891. This is close. Cool. I'm going to make the background black, just so it's a little bit easier for us to see. It's going to reload. Awesome. Cool. So on flow 2, when I click on this menu, that pops in. So you see that I can't actually close this because I did not say anything to make it close. So if I go back here and I go to this interaction right here, this little soup, this little noodle, if I click close when clicking outside, I can now close it. So now I can click it open, click it close, click it open, click it closed. It's going to actually just undo whatever animation it did originally. I also think this is a little uncomfortable where I can still see the whole app. So I'm going to go ahead and add a background of just a little bit of a gray overlay. So now it's darkened. You can see that it just darkens the background a little bit. So it feels like there's this shadow being cast. It feels like there's something that's opening on top of the screen that I was on before. So yeah, that is the first interaction of a overlay. The next thing I want to do is be able to go to settings. So I have this settings panel and I'm going to drag it over to the settings frame. So here I have it on tap, navigate to P_settings. That's the one I want. In this case, there might be different things on the animation of what feels better. So let's go ahead and see what it might look like if it's just moving in and see if that feels uncomfortable. Okay, so that's what happened. You saw that it moved in from the left side, and I think that feels a little bit weird. Let's actually do slide in. Oh, that's not the same thing, sorry. Let's have it do move in from the bottom. So now it's actually going to come in from the bottom instead of where it was before. If I want to restart this, I'm going to press R. Pressing R on your computer is going to let you just do the whole thing over again. You see it right here, R. So here I open up the menu, I click settings, and it comes up from the bottom. And I actually like that a lot better because this particular screen is designed to look a little bit like a card that moves up from the bottom. It's a pattern that I've seen before. Now that we're here, there's nothing we can do. Nothing clicking on this X doesn't go back, so we want to make sure that the X does actually go back. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, drag it from the X back to this screen, and have it say on tap, navigate, and then I actually want it to move out. So we saw earlier that because the screen came in from the bottom, it would make sense for it to leave by coming out from the bottom as well. So for move out, I'm going to have it slide out. And let's show you what it would look like if it didn't do that, because then it'd be kind of uncomfortable. So I click here, open the settings, and I close it, and for some reason it goes to the right. That feels a little bit wrong because it's not physically going where I thought it was going to go. When you have these things that move in and out, you can imagine them physically existing on this phone. So I want to make sure that it feels right. So it's going to leave. It's going to leave from the bottom, just like how I wanted it to. So yeah, now I've got these screens that do that. And the last thing I want to do is say like, hey, when you click on this button, it's going to open this screen. It's going to go to a version of the screen that has the button toggled. So on tap, I don't want it to move out. I want it to smart animate because I want to see that circle slowly move. But let's see what that looks like if we do have it move out. It's going to be uncomfortable. That was weird. I didn't like that. Let's see what it looks like if it's instant. It's also going to be weird. Restart. Click. Click. Instant. It just pops right over. So if we want it to just smoothly turn green and move to the right, we can just have it smart animate. So we smart animate, it's going to ease out. We're going to see that it will look natural. It will feel good. Click. Isn't that nice? Isn't that lovely? It just does a little bit of a thing, and it feels really good. Figma is very smart. Take advantage of it. Let the computer do the work for you. And just to make this make sense, when I click here, I want it to go back. I want it to smart animate back again. And then to make sure all our bases are covered, this X logically should do the same thing as the previous one. So you're going to have it go click X, and then it's going to still move out the way that it came. So yeah, now I'll close that. Okay, so that whole prototype, one more time. You can click this, it'll open an overlay, which I can leave by clicking anywhere else. Open the overlay, click anywhere else. I can click on settings. It's going to open it up from the bottom. It's going to come up from the bottom. If I close the settings, it's going to leave from the bottom again. Want to access again, click this, open, settings, toggle, 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 toggle. It looks awesome. It's smart animating. It does exactly what I wanted to do. And then I can close it. That's the prototyping demo. So just to give a sense of how annoying it would be to prototype this, if I actually wanted all of these to react, I would have to make so many versions because it needs to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of all of them on, and then all the variations with some of them on, some of them off. Which means that if you're doing testing or you're delivering something that just needs to show like to the engineers, hey, it will look like this, you don't always have to make everything prototyped. It just needs to communicate the action. So I picked this particular toggle to toggle on and off, and it's implied like, hey, everything else is going to react the same way. I don't have to spend the 2 hours making every version. This is honestly fine. Sometimes you might need to have everything be exhaustive, but you should self-evaluate how much you need a prototype for it to be useful, not just for the sake of prototyping it. But yeah, any questions about any of this? While we're here, I will actually go ahead and also show you how to access these starting points. So you see here, I've got these two flows. Flow 1, if I click here, it'll bring me to the beginning. And I'm going to rename this to be example flow. And from here, I can go to flow 2, click on this, and call it class demo flow. So now these names are more descriptive, and I can click on them and know what I'm going to do. So let's actually look at the example and see if anything was different. That opens, so you see that they actually did not allow clicking outside. I think I like ours better there. You can open the settings, it will toggle, and theirs is actually also not smart animated, nor does it go back. So I think we actually made a better version that feels smoother, it feels more natural, and it does a little bit more. Yeah. If there are no questions, we're going to go ahead and take a really quick break until 8:10. So just 3 minutes. And then we're going to come back and talk about design accessibility for the last 20 minutes of class. This is like my favorite thing to talk about. I care a lot about design accessibility, and you should too. But for now, we're going to turn the camera off. We'll start again at 8:10. Okay, hello. I know that it was a short break, but we got to get going on this so we can spend a little bit more time talking about design accessibility. So I'm going to stall for a bit just for those who are coming back to their computers or hear me talking now and are walking back. But yeah, so design accessibility spans a lot of different topics, and it spans basically every pillar or every aspect of design, no matter what kind of discipline you're in. So the concept of accessibility seeks to ensure that products and experiences can be accessed by everyone, regardless of ability. Accessibility within design involves considering the needs of people with disabilities. So a lot of the time you hear the words accessibility, and it feels like it's something that's tacked on to the end of the process, or it feels like something that's like, oh, hey, we built the app, but we need to make sure it's accessible. The reality is that you need to be thinking about accessibility from the start. You need to be thinking about, at the very beginning, when you're doing your user research, are you thinking about people who are disabled, who need to use this kind of content or need to use whatever it is that you're designing? You think about the communities that you're designing for and designing with. Make sure that you're actually addressing their needs through whatever it is that you're doing. So with that in mind, and thinking about accessibility as part of your entire process, part of your entire design, and not just something you do at the end, you can start thinking about, what do we mean when we say the word accessibility? So disabilities are often defined in two ways. One, as a physical or mental impairment or condition that limits one's ability to do certain activities, and or the inability of the environment to accommodate for one's needs. And this idea of it's not the people's fault, it is the environment's fault is really important to think about and really important to keep in mind. The reality is that there shouldn't be a standard person that you were designing for. Everybody experiences things in different ways, which is, obviously everybody has a different life. And it's important that we always accommodate for or designing for disabled people, and make sure that the environment or the use or the product is usable. It is important that everything is always usable. So we can think about abstracting this, or I guess making it more tangible with the idea of mismatched personas. So as we think about two definitions, it's helpful to think of disabilities not as a permanent condition sometimes, but sometimes as a result of a lot of different factors. So in the case of design, you can think about this persona chart. Let me move myself over here. Yeah, you can think about this persona chart. So you have this sense of permanent, temporary, and situational disabilities, and then these different senses here: touch, sight, hearing, and speaking. So there's a lot of different layers to each of these different things that you're talking about. So somebody with, for example, one arm is a permanent touch disability, whereas somebody with a mismatched persona, like somebody in a foreign country with a heavy accent, it's not necessarily a disability, but it is a case where they are not matching the environment that they're in. The environment is not making it possible for them to do activities that they would normally do. So there's some interesting examples here of like a temporary hearing loss would be an ear infection, where you normally are able to hear, but right now you can't. And what it matters is that in that moment that you were using something or that you were doing something, you were unable to hear. A situational sight might be a distracted driver. So somebody who is, seeing something on the road, or who is being bothered by something, can't see what's going on in front of them, and is a case that you have to think about. Yeah. So basically, in short, you can think of a disability as a mismatch between a person and their environment. There's some kind of thing disconnecting them, usually something related to a sense or to mobility, anything like that, that is making it impossible or difficult to interact with the environment in its quote-unquote intended way. A lot of the situations where you find that things are not accessible is that whatever is being used cannot be used in the intended way. Something has to be added, like you have to add subtitles, or you have to add additional features to make something usable to somebody. That's a problem. So while we're talking about this as well, we want to talk about shifting language. So a previous term that people used for a long time was hearing impaired. So this was like intended to be a nice way to phrase things. It's supposed to be this idea of like medical terms feel nicer. But the term hearing impaired implies damage to a person's hearing. It's focusing on the impairment and not the person. So over time, the term deaf with big D or little d deaf, depending on the person's personal preference, or the term hard of hearing have become more accepted. There's also a lot of conversation around the idea of person first or identity first language, in which case you can think about the terms person with a disability versus disabled person. The best thing to do is to ask each person what they prefer. If you're working with someone who is disabled, ask them what language they prefer, ask them how they feel about person or ability first language. There's a really good blog post that I would love to share with everyone that I think it's really important to look at called I Am Disabled, and is a case for identity first language, I believe. But there's not usually a perfect answer to everything, but there are some wrong answers. So be very mindful of the way that you're speaking. Avoid things like special needs. Avoid things like differently abled. They're terms that have been like associated with being derogatory or just straight up wrong, that you need to be mindful of. It is also your own responsibility to educate yourself on some things because we're not able to talk about everything, and it's not on disabled people to educate you either. So think about that. We obviously can't cover every single word in the universe, but think about ways to shift your language and mind the way that you're speaking. So when we talk about accessibility, there's kind of three layers to it, three different paths that a lot of accessibility goes down. First is usable design, something that functions as intended, is easy and intuitive. Accessible design then accommodates for the needs of a particular group of people. So often we say accessible design, it's specifically for people who are deaf or hard of hearing, it's specifically for people who are blind. But inclusive design then, it goes one step further and includes and applies to as many people as possible, whether they are disabled or not. But we want to kind of hit another section of that. So we can think about first accessibility in, for example, visual design. So a lot of the basic things that you're going to hear a lot of the time when you talk about accessibility are image descriptions and alt text. So these are text descriptions of an image. Text to generally be concise but descriptive enough for users to understand the context of an image. So this example, there's a picture of me surrounded by decorative shapes, and it indicates that I have he, him pronouns and has the text director of marketing. This is pretty basic. People should start using image descriptions, especially if you have particular content that is image heavy. A lot of, social media, that's the word. A lot of social media has started doing alt text by default, but a lot of the time it's really shit. It's not good. It's not well made. So it's something to keep in mind as you go through any kind of digital content. Another is color contrast. This is like a huge, not really buzzwordy thing, but a lot of times people will say, we did the color contrast check and now we're good. But it is important. Text on the background that is on need to meet high enough levels of contrast to be readable and discernible. So this, for example, white on blue that we accidentally used in the past fails WCAG, which is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Very base rules to be following about any content that you make. So a lot of the time when you make something, it will look nice to you, but will not be readable to other people. So make sure that you're being mindful of that. There's actually some really good plugins you can do on Figma that are going to help with that as well. And finally, closed captioning. So closed captioning transcribes audio into text. So users that are hard of hearing or deaf might use captioning to read alongside a visual program. And I think closed captions and subtitles are a really easy example of a case where accessible design benefits everybody. So I, for example, have subtitles on everything I watch all the time because I have a hard time just like mentally processing what's going on audibly. I don't have a disability that's related to hearing, but it's something that helps me just because it's something that is useful. That's one very easy example of something that can be used by anyone, and an example of like inclusive design. So color contrast, going back to that, is important to consider for those who have low vision or a form of color vision deficiency, color blindness, that might make information being displayed difficult to process. So if you are fully colorblind, you would not be able to identify this BART map because of the way that the colors reduce in grayscale. A lot of these maps look exactly the same, or a lot of the lines look exactly the same, and you can't identify necessarily which line is which based on this key. This is a reason why a lot of the time in design, people will urge you to have color not be the only differentiating factor. So in this case, we might say like all of these should be different forms of dotted lines. They should all have different outlines. There should be something besides color that communicates what's going on. Or straight up just label them. Have the words that are for each line really clearly indicated on this map to be accessible. So there are some things on the web, I think also Figma plugins that help you visualize what things look like with different types of color blindness, so you get a sense of what colors are sensitive and what colors are important to be mindful of as you go through things. Yeah, so some examples of accessible design that are more inclusive, that capture that pillar of being usable to more people are these. So tactile paving. At the edge of every BART station, at the edge of every subway station, there's this distinct bumpy paving to let you know you're at the edge of a platform. You see that same kind of tactile paving on sidewalks, and they're helpful for those who use canes or who use wheelchairs or walkers. And they're also just like, if you're walking and you're looking at your phone and you feel that you're on the bumpy thing, you're going to know that something is up. So curb cuts are another really quick example. They began in Berkeley through the efforts of Ed Roberts and a lot of other disability rights activists who were basically advocating for having curb cuts, which are these little slants in the curb so that you are able to get up them in a wheelchair. Before that, curbs were just up. And if you were in a device that couldn't get onto the curb, basically fuck you. There was no real way to get up them. So curb cuts also started being like a kind of champion, but also a buzzword of accessibility, where a lot of things will be deemed like a curb cut in that they're an important thing to add, but can be seen as like a really quick step. So things like just thinking about text. It's a small change. It's very important and a small change, but sometimes it's not really enough. It's not always the full solution. This is a really good start, but I think people tend to use the curb cuts example as a way to champion and say like, oh, Berkeley is super accessible. It's not. You need to think about more than just this initial intervention that you're adding, but it is still helpful. And so one more example that we'll talk about is text-to-speech and speech-to-text. So translations from text-to-speech can be really helpful for users who, for example, use text-to-speech to vocalize their thoughts. There's a lot of different use cases for this. So somebody who is nonverbal or is low verbal on certain days might want to use text-to-speech to communicate more easily, or they might just need to type to communicate more easily. There's also some other more obscure examples, like text-to-speech on TikTok captions has helped people be anonymous on TikTok, or if they're self-conscious about their voice, they're able to use that to still communicate with people. A hyper-specific example is like Toby Fox, who created Undertale, recently did a whole live stream where he only used text-to-speech because he wants to keep his or this like game developer wants to keep his identity private for safety reasons. Like he wants to stay anonymous, but he still wants to participate in things, so he's able to use text-to-speech. Another example of like speech-to-text being used in an everyday situation is if I'm driving and I need to send you a text, I could use speech-to-text. Not that I should be texting while driving, but it would make the situation safer if I was in an emergency and I had to contact somebody. Cool. So revisiting that period we talked about, we want to be in this space that's not only usable and accessible and inclusive, it's all three of them. And that's where the idea of universal design comes in. So universal design exists as a sort of culmination of the principles that are championed by usable, accessible, and inclusive design. These are three terms that people will use to describe different methods and different ideas. They're all kind of different ideologies around how to create design, and one that we want to talk about is universal design. I also want to preface this by saying that this is not a perfect case. I think there's also a lot of different situations where universal design is not really the right way to go, but it's something that we want to put on your radars and get you to start thinking about. The best thing to do is to actually read writing that disabled people have written about these different kinds of design, these different frameworks, and what's actually helpful. But with that in mind, this idea to just take things with a grain of salt, we'll talk a little bit about what universal design is. So Universal design is design that encompasses the needs of users to the greatest ability without the need for extra accommodations. And something I want to point out is that the word universal is a little misleading. It is not meaning to design for every single person on the planet. I don't think that will ever be possible. There will never really be one item that is the best possible use case for every single human being on the planet. The goal of universal design is to accommodate for and encompass the needs of as many people as possible without having to add accommodations. So this example that we're going to talk about is a vegetable peeler, right? So if you cook, bake, if you've ever made anything that needs a vegetable peeler, you've probably used it. And not all of them are really useful, but the OXO Good Grips one is very easy to hold. They invented this specifically for those who have arthritis and have trouble gripping items. It's got a much fatter handle than a lot of other vegetable peelers. It's got a good amount of grip to it, and it makes it really easy to use. With that in mind, this vegetable peeler is not literally usable by every single person. If, for example, you only have one arm, you wouldn't be able to use this vegetable peeler. If you have a motor disability that makes it difficult to hold things still, or if you have a tic that causes you to drop things, this is not a usable tool. With that said, it is designed in a way to be as usable to as many people as possible. This means that it was designed not for just the quote-unquote standard consumer, which is the standard consumer typically is going to be white, able-bodied, straight, neurotypical, basically who a lot of companies will design for. But instead, it is designed to be usable by more than that audience. So it's designed to be used for as many people as possible. It's got maybe you can say a big enough grip that a child or a younger person is able to hold it. It has a large enough grip that somebody with arthritis is able to hold it without hurting their hands. It's a sharp enough knife that you don't have to use a lot of force in order to start peeling something. But again, it's not designed for literally every person on Earth to use. Yeah, that is your super, super quick crash course into accessibility. I don't think that it's necessarily the perfect possible information we could have given you. I think it's a really good start. And I think that it's important for everybody to do their own research as well into accessibility and into these different frameworks. I can link a couple of different sources that I think are really helpful for people. One is Access Guide that talks about different types of digital design that are helpful. And if you're interested in it, Game Maker's Toolkit is a YouTube channel that talks about accessibility in video games, which I found really interesting and easier to digest. But yeah, any questions about that before we wrap up for the day? Okay, let's go ahead and wrap up. So this week's homework is none. Work on the midterm. There's no file and there's no reading. We just want you to get started on the midterm project. I will be posting it immediately after class. So we want you to take the time you would normally spend on homework doing the midterm. We know that midterm season is rough. We know that it also never ends. But this project is your first chance to do basically whatever you want. So we want you to go wide, we want you to go deep with your ideas and approaches, and use your time wisely over the next couple of weeks. And with that, we also really, 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 really want you to come to office hours. We want you to talk to us about your projects. We have an additional office hours tomorrow, Wednesday, from 3 to 4 p.m. If you want to do the open-ended proposal, please come to office hours on Wednesday or Friday. If you are still struggling to choose which of the 4 proposals you want to do, please come talk to us. We will be there to help you. We'll talk about, what you want to get out of the project, what you want to get out of the class, make sure that it's appropriate, that you're on the right track. We also generally just would like for more people to come to office hours. We're there every week. We know that it's just hard to fit into your schedule, but we're there to answer any questions that you have. So please come out. And also, if you don't have any questions for office hours, feel free to come and just chat about anything, about design, about accessibility, about anything you have going on. We'd love to just meet you. Yeah. Lab 5 is basic prototyping. You're going to be following through this lab with your TAs this Thursday. In lab, we're going to do basic prototyping first, so you can kind of visualize all of these different exercises to visualize different things, and then we can do a mock of Spotify. And the secret word for today is going to be, the secret word for today was going to be smart. S-M-A-R-T, smart is the secret word. Yep, make sure you put that in the attendance form. And finally, announcements again, homework 5, work on midterm, lab 5. Please remember that lab is mandatory if you are enrolled. If you cannot go to lab, you must tell your TA ahead of time. We've been having a lot of students make up labs, which is totally fine, but your TAs need to know ahead of time because it can affect the way that people run labs. Lab attendance is part of your grade. You are required to do the labs, so please make sure that you're attending, and if you're not attending, please make sure that you make them up. And if you have a conflict, let me know, reach out, we'll try to resolve it for you. Again, the project proposals are due this Friday. If you're going to do that, please come to office hours. And again, we highly encourage you to come to office hours to talk about your midterms with us, or just to talk and just to chat. We'd love to see you. Yeah, it is 8:31. Thank you all so much for coming today. Thank you also for your flexibility, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.